Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. As I'm sure you're aware by now, we're working with our partners Kia UK this summer. Kia have been embedded in the world of cricket for almost 15 years. Kia has actively supported the rise of women's cricket since 2014 and have been the proud sponsors of Surrey County Cricket Club for the last decade. During each episode of the podcast, Kia will provide you with an opportunity to get closer to the action through their Kia's movement that inspires moment. These include tickets and experiences to key cricket competitions across the summer. Listen out each week to hear how you can get involved and win an opportunity of a lifetime. A bonus pre-Headingley podcast will chat through the latest men's and women's Ashes news, as well as everything else that's been going on in the world game over the last week or so. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today is Phil Walker, Joe Harman, and Matt Roller. Coming up later in the show, we've got Wisden columnist and England bowler Ollie Robinson joining us for the first time this summer. And we've also got Somerset's Ben Green, one of the players of the season so far, joining us for a quick chat. But first, let's head to Mark Butcher to hear his thoughts on the England 11 for Headingley. Mark, the big news yesterday was that Ollie Pope has been ruled out of the series. How would you go about replacing Pope? The Telegraph is reporting that Brook's going to move up to 3, Moeen's going to come in at 7, Woakes in at 8 with Anderson and Tongue dropping out. Yeah, so how would you replace Pope?
Well, look, I mean, in terms of how they've done it, I don't really see a better way given the situation that we're faced with. I think you can talk about how ideally the team should look and the balance of it and the rest of it, which would probably include having Johnny Bairstow batting at 5 and not keeping wicket and Folkes being in it, which is fine. But the situation we find ourselves in does not allow that. And the issue is really Ben Stokes is not playing as a genuine all-rounder now. That's the situation that we thought might be the case before the series started, but now we know. I mean, we've watched him bowl and hobble through overs in the first 2 Test matches, and it's just he cannot be relied upon is the wrong word. He cannot be employed as a genuine third or fourth seamer in the team. So what it looks like they're going to do is actually the best way of doing it, I think, given the situation we find ourselves in. So Johnny moves up to 6. They play Moeen. Obviously, they've got a specialist spinner in the side. Harry Brook, again, you know, the top order thing has always been a kind of, given the way that they want to play, has always been, well, it kind of doesn't really matter. You know, Duckett has been brilliant, but don't get me wrong, he's been absolutely superb. And if you were going to remove or replace any of the top 3, it wouldn't be him. But now the situation requires Brook to bat at 3, which is fine by me. And so what have we got? So they're saying Johnny at 6, fine. Moeen 7. Chris Woakes who's a genuine all rounder. It sort of strengthens England in terms of their batting depth, which was a little bit weak at Lords. But I suppose, and also bringing in Mark Wood is something that we've been crying out for, hasn't it? Particularly given that it looks like we're going to have bouncer warfare between now and Doomsday. So him being in the side gives England a bit of a cutting edge, and Woakes is a steady performer. So I think in terms of how they've ended up with a team that actually looks perhaps better than the one they started with, which doesn't mean that I'm having a pop at the people that were picked. It's just it kind of looks better balanced this way around than it did before.
It's an acknowledgement of the state of Stokes' knee, which the first 2 teams didn't really reflect. Just wanted to get your thoughts on Brook at 3 a little bit more. You obviously batted at 3 a lot for England. Brook, out of all of the top 7 that England have played so far this series, is probably the guy who's gone hardest. Do you think he will change, and do you think you can do that at 3? I know that Pope hadn't had any experience of batting at 3 before he moved up, but actually he does ride periods of pressure and did so successfully for a lot of last year before really kicking on once he got in.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think out of all of England's top 5 or 6, Harry Brook has probably got the best all-round game technique. Anyhow, and and the embarrassment, I think, of his dismissal in the previous Test match might well sort of have rung a bell in his head, which says, okay, come on, I'm better than this. And batting at 3, he will have to be, because obviously the ball is much newer, and you have a slightly different job to do. And I have no doubt that he'll be able to adapt to it. Whether that's where he ends up throughout the rest of his career is another thing entirely. Which is kind of why when we were having all this speculation about how England might line up and how they might keep Ben Foakes inside before the whole thing started, that I said I wouldn't have any issue with him opening batting, really. He wouldn't, in my mind, he wouldn't score any more or any less runs than Zach at the top. So just it might be, it's a temporary fix, but it might be one that we need to employ. And as it's turned out, because of other circumstances, he ends up batting up in the top order anyway. So look, I've no issue with it. I think he's a fantastic talent. He just needs to kind of give himself a chance to make big runs. I mean, the interesting thing for me is that the way that England have batted in the Test match series is not like they played last year. And it's almost as though they've kidded themselves that you can get matches done against any opposition in 3.5 days and have a day and a half on the golf course, and I think that the last Test match, if the first Test match didn't prove to them that is not the case against a side of this quality, then the Lord's Test match may well have done.
Well, it all kicks off in less than 24 hours. Cheers for your time, Butch. Catch you soon. All our Ashes moments of the week are brought to you by our dapper partners, Charles Tyrwhitt, the British menswear brand, know a thing or two about looking sharp, whether you're working or weekending. Plus, you might recognise their brand partner, Joe Root. You can channel Joe's style with 20% off at Charles Tyrwhitt. Just head online to charlestyrwhitt.com and use promo code Wisden23 at checkout. Phil? The big news yesterday was that Ollie Pope is ruled out of the Ashes.
Yeah, what a
we
blow.
now know what the team is. Harry Brook at 3. First, just on Pope, that is gutting for a guy so central to what England done in the last year, so much so that he's been elevated to the vice-captaincy.
Yeah. Watching at Lords, it felt like there was a lot of walking wounded and a lot of people not there anyway. It's amazing how an Ashes series does this. I felt really sorry for him when he was out on the field on day 2 or 3. Clearly in discomfort, tried to overcompensate for the fact that one shoulder was buggered and re-buggered the other one. He's had shoulder problems now for a couple of years, both shoulders. It's a strange injury to have. It's not a conventional cricketing injury. It's obviously just a massive setback for the boy who'd become one of the most identifiable motifs of this whole thing. It requires yet another change and shift. And I think in the shakedown of this whole series, or in the post-mortem of this series, whatever happens over the next 3 or 4 weeks, I think it does have to be considered that England's best laid plans have been upended on a number of levels. They wanted to go in there with quicks on quick pitches, and they end up bowling bouncers at 78, 79. They wanted to go in with a left arm spinner to gnaw away at one end, and poor old Jack came a cropper as well. So there's been a lot of having to think on the hoof here, and while people can argue the toss over various decisions selectorially, they've not been given an easy hand, let's put it that way.
Obviously gutting for Pope, Joe, but in a way the team is an acknowledgement of Stokes' fitness in terms of they've got another seamer in. Stokes obviously has bowled a fair bit during the series, but he's nowhere near 100%. So I guess the selection is an acknowledgement that Stokes hasn't been 100% fit to bowl and be the four-seamer.
That is true, and it is widely predicted. He's been insisting he's okay. It hasn't looked that way. But he hasn't done a huge amount of bowling ever since the Bazball thing started. So it does feel like they've departed quite a lot from a successful formula, further than I would have done at this stage. At the start of this series, they had the unenviable, or enviable, whichever way you look at it, position of having to drop someone who didn't really deserve to be dropped, and Ben Foakes was the guy to make way. I'm not sure that much has changed since that. We shouldn't just have seen Foakes come back into the side. It's kind of boring to even go here again, but that is the way I'd have gone. Whether it's Brook at 3 or Stokes at 3, I don't mind too much. I'd have probably gone Stokes. And then you have Foakes at 7, Moen and your 3 seamers. There's this kind of illusion that they've strengthened the batting with Moen at 7 and Woakes at 8, but Moen hasn't scored red ball runs, hasn't played red ball cricket for a very long time. Woakes hasn't played much cricket, hasn't done much batting either. I think Foakes at 7 would have been stronger than having Moen and Woakes at 7 and 8. And England have had a long tail through, again, the whole time of Bazball. They've had a long tail and they've succeeded with it. I just feel like 2 defeats has shaken things up more than it should have done. 4 changes after a test match. They haven't played brilliantly, but they haven't played terribly. This feels like shaking it up too much.
Go to Matt first.
Do you have any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I think it's a good thing that England have the extra batter in.
So do I.
In Woakes batting at number 8. They obviously haven't, as you say, Joe, they haven't had a sort of an actual number 8 batting at 8 for most of this era, especially at home. And for me, I think that has actually been a bit of an issue at times. I think if you think about the counterfactual of Chris Woakes walking out at number 8 with Broad and Robinson behind him, obviously we wouldn't have got the great drama at Lords of Broad and his antics either side of the lunch break, but you'd have to say England would probably have had a better chance of winning that test match. I suppose the most interesting one for me with Woakes is just what is going to come out, because we've not really seen a lot of him with a red ball for a while. His last test was in the pre-Bazball era on that tour of the Caribbean. And obviously he missed pretty much all of last summer with his knee. So it will be a big ask for him to come in and hit the ground running straight away, and especially sort of looking at the fact he'll probably be first change again, where you'd probably ideally have him in as an opening bowler. But I'm intrigued to see how it goes, just because I think obviously this is the series, it feels like, this week coming up. And while I don't necessarily feel they've doubled down in terms of the team structure as such, it feels like all of these changes sort of fit the general philosophy to me of trying to take the most attacking option that they can think of at a particular time, which in this case seems to be restructuring the side and having a bit more batting and allowing everyone else to go a little bit harder.
Well, Woakes is undoubtedly he's a cut above all the other bowlers in terms of his batting ability, but he hasn't done well against Australia with the bat in the past, really. He struggles against the short ball, of which we're probably going to see quite a lot based on what we've seen so far. So
maybe 1 or 2.
There is obviously some logic there, but I'm just not sure actually it's going to stack up. I would have just picked the 4 bowlers I think would do the job, and any batting ability from that point would be a bonus. But look, we'll see. But I still think England at 5 down look vulnerable with Moen at 7, Woakes at 8, in a way that they wouldn't have necessarily done with Folks at 7.
The one that I would have... I'm surprised he wasn't in the squad in the first place. I've said it before. I thought Sam Curran should have been in the 15, 16, whatever it is, doesn't matter. Carry an entourage with you. And I would have probably, if he had been in the squad, lent towards that. I think Curran at 7 or 8, either side of Moen, maybe Moen at 8, Curran at 7. That looks quite tempting to me.
I can see that as well. That's a more legitimate batting option rather than picking a bowler who's a better batter for that reason. Yeah.
Nonetheless, I like the balance of the team overall. Clearly, Stokes bowled through the madness for 11 overs on the spin. Rope-a-dope style, actually bowled quite well. Looked like he had decent rhythm, even though his front knee is collapsing underneath him in a way it used to be braced. It now collapses. A lot of no balls, which tells a story, but he was still getting it down there. But the point is, you might not see him bowl another ball next week. Clearly, he has to manage this thing quite profoundly. So, considering that they've just played a lot of cricket, considering that Robinson has played 2 on the spin, Broad's played 2 on the spin, they're both in this team. I think to go in with 2 fresh seamers, whether they're the right personnel or not, that makes sense. Tongue, who was excellent at Lords, that was a real graduation day for him. Superb, I thought, in parts. The 2 quickest pitches in the series will be Old Trafford and the Oval, so he'll come back for the 4th and might even play back-to-back. I can understand why, despite him being good at Lords, they've held him back.
And Wood has to play this test, right? As Matt says, this is the series. There's no point holding anything back at this stage. If he's fit, he plays.
100%. And while the Folks argument raged on, and necessarily so, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think once that was settled, rightly or wrongly, but once that was settled, I was never expecting them to suddenly go back to him with the scenario that faced them. This notion, well, you just bring him in and just move everybody up. If you do that, then you go into a test match with 3 seamers, 2 of whom are already knackered because they've played 2 back-to-back. Moen, whose finger could collapse on day 1, and then 1 seamer with Stokes on 1 leg. So that was never on the cards. The idea of well, you just move them all up, bring in the blue-eyed boy. It's just unrealistic. So I can totally understand why they've picked this team, as in the structure of the team. It makes sense. Also, Bairstow at 5, just a little detail, but he's carded at 5, right? Is that right?
Yeah, correct.
Carded at 5 with Stokes at 6. I think Stokes is immovable at 6. I think it's a good idea to keep him there. Bairstow put a little bit more on him. I like the look of the team. It's a gamble, obviously, but they have to play. They have to throw their cards in now, and that's the way they like to do it anyway.
It's also, I think, probably worth raising the weather forecast at this point, which does not look good over the weekend. I think decent first couple of days, but I saw someone share a weather forecast for the weekend, which didn't look great. A lot of rain around.
Don't say that, Joey. It's my first weekend. I'm not having a twat around. Is that really the? Oh.
Weird summer for a few players involved. So one, Woakes, who played a lot of red ball cricket to get himself ready for the Ashes. He's now playing the most important game of the series so far, having not played a game of red ball cricket for 2 months. And then it's also been a weird summer for Dan Lawrence, right? Slightly surprising inclusion in the test squads in the first place. And then when a batter does go down, he still doesn't play. And he's now officially been on the bench for 8 Ashes tests in a row now, which must be some kind of record.
But it does mean he'll be available for Essex's quarterfinal in the Blast. So
huge.
We'll get to the Blast later. Don't worry. Matt, I was going to ask, what's
high? It's long.
What's the difference between Bayliss ball and Bazball? Because we've got a 5, 6, 7, 8 of Bairstow, Stokes, Moeen and Woakes, which we could have seen completely realistically 7 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, in some respects, not that much. I think the big difference is that they've sort of doubled down on this, and it's become the more important thing, because obviously during the Bayliss era, it was very much secondary in England's priority list behind ODI cricket. Whereas as soon as Rob Key came in, I think he made quite a big point of saying, Test cricket is our general overriding priority, and we will start caring about one-day cricket and T20 cricket in the, pretty much immediate run-up to World Cups, and only then. I very much agree that I think there are definitely shades of everything that England were doing under Trevor Bayliss in the McCullum and Stokes era.
You would say that, darling, wouldn't you? 2 weeks out, that first book of yours.
Just on Pope's injury, Phil, you mentioned it, but there is a possibility that it was aggravated by fielding on it in the second innings. It was quite strange. So Jeetan Patel, one of England's assistant coaches at the time, said it's a bit confusing. We think, or we assumed, he had to be out on the field, otherwise we'd have had to have fielded with 10 men. That made no sense to me or us. We threw him there in the risk that he wouldn't have to touch the ball. So that's just quite a weird situation for a guy who, it turns out, has got a dislocated shoulder, being on the field an innings after he'd injured it. Anyway, moving on. Paul writes in to say, long-time listener, my favourite podcast of the week. I previously emailed about an Ollie Pope future 11 with lots of uncapped players.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway.
I like that one.
Awesome test match at Lord's. Amazing series so far. I find the media's portrayal of things very interesting. Yes, we have lost 2, and yes, we could be 2-0 up, but the moaning and ultra-critical portrayals of Bazball, to me, speak to something else. I don't think the majority of BBC, Sky, and other commentators understand Bazball and its philosophy. When over the last year, Stokes and Baz have won matches and revolutionising Test cricket, commentators say, wow, what a day. I don't know quite what to say. Maybe I should have played like that. It's all brilliant. But when England lose to the best team in the world, who we know from 1 to 11, they know how to win top games. It's all criticism from the media. They should stop slogging. This isn't cricket. They need to change, etc. You literally can't have it both ways. When it's going amazingly, the media is all cheers, but when they lose, it's the end of the world. Stokes and the team have showed they can play in several different ways and different gears. We're obviously playing better and are more entertaining in this way than we were in the years before it. Get behind it and enjoy it.
I think that's all absolutely fair. I think the legitimate beef that people had with that second afternoon was that it was brainless cricket, irrespective of what title your boss put on it. You have to play the situation. There's a lot of versatility within the creed, within the doctrine of whatever you want to call it. There is more flexibility than I thought was shown in that moment. That's all. It didn't, to me, reflect some sort of blind devotion, cultish devotion to the way. It just wasn't. I thought it was the percentages weren't played. The probability was stacked against England in those moments, and I thought the way that Stokes played in the first innings, forget the miracle, the way that he played in the first innings was his way, and he does things in deeds rather than words. It was his way of saying there are other ways to approach this situation. That was my only feeling. I didn't see that it was reflective of anything darker than that.
I would also say I don't think that email is necessarily a fair reflection of the way England's defeats have been reported, really. I think there's actually been quite a lot of patience. I think people do remember the brilliant times that aren't so long ago and have faith in the kind of overall project. But yeah, as Phil says, there has to be some nuance and adaptability to it. And I think it was a frustration that 2 games that they could have won and had their moments got away from them, when if they'd played things just a little bit differently, they could have won the game. We're not saying tear up Bazball. You know, maybe there are a few journalists, but I haven't really seen that response. I think there has been frustration at certain wickets at certain times, but and also England's frailties, if we can call them that, have been shown up just by the way that Australia have played. They've been so pragmatic, played Test cricket in the way that we kind of used to understand it, that when England do it differently and it doesn't work, it looks particularly bad. As the guys wrote in there said, we need to remember this is a very good side, and also remember how bad we were not that long ago. If we had continued to play in the style that we were under Root, would we be in a better position now? I don't think so. I think there's every chance we'd have lost the 32 tests by a bigger margin than we did. So there is still faith, certainly, I think, in this room in the project, but just with a little bit more cricket smarts at the key moments.
There's
Matthew was shaking his head.
Well, so firstly, I'll make 2 points. The first one was that I don't think I've ever heard a 17 get as much praise as Stokes's did on the second evening. Maybe it laid the groundwork for what he did in the second innings, but I don't know. I thought it was slightly over the top for a 17. What I will say is, I think in terms of the media response, I think particularly I was surprised by the level of it on the second day, because I thought that England went into the second day as underdogs in the match and they left as favourites. They were 280 for 4 overnight.
This is the strange thing. You're absolutely right. And yet me and you spoke about this. We were pissed off at the end of day 2. I was resigned at the end of day 1. I thought we lost the Ashes after that day 1. Bowled poorly. 5 down, whatever it was. Pulled ourselves back into the game on day 2, and I was pissed off.
I was genuinely furious.
I know you were, right? And you're sort of well adjusted and normal. Day 3, we sort of lost it again.
Yeah.
But I sort of made my peace with it.
Yeah.
So it was everything's topsy turvy in this world these days. And
but so
I get what you're saying. If you look at the scorecard, sure.
The moment that sort of distilled the attitude that is being talked about by the email is, I thought there was a really bizarre interview between Jonathan Agnew and Ben Duckett at the end of the second day, where I thought of those 3 short ball dismissals, Duckett, if you look at the replay of his shot, he's trying to hit it down, he's trying to knock it on his head like he had all day.
Sure.
He'd obviously top edged a couple as well, but he scored a lot of runs and pulls them by knocking a short ball around the corner. But because of some variable bounce, it bounced a little bit more. He top edged it down to long leg and he got out for 98. And Agnew's response was sort of, you must be devastated. And what are the dressing room thinking about such a devastating collapse, where Duckett was very much saying, what devastating collapse with 280 for 4. We're in a pretty good position in this game, which I think was probably the sort of attitude being alluded to there.
It's important to differentiate between Duckett, Pope and Root as well.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Brook as well. I was talking about it at the time, and I said the same thing, that they are not all of a piece necessarily. I thought Pope's veered into idiocy, I have to be honest, because he was setting himself with his hands there with 3 men with variable bounce, and he was setting himself, his hands were literally by his right ear roll.
He had success playing that shot on completely different grounds against different bowlers in New Zealand. Neil Wagner, who's 79 miles per hour, a lot shorter.
For sure. So I found that a bit frustrating. Root's innings was un-Root-like, but there is issues around his back and how nimble he is at ducking and weaving and so on. Brook got himself in a mental tangle, and I know that he hung on until the following morning and before playing that spectacularly silly shot. But I don't think they deserve to be nailed for what happened there necessarily, but it was frustrating because that was their moment. And I sometimes get the sense with this team that they are so thrilled by their own brilliance, and they're so pleased with themselves that they don't always notice when the moment is to really ram it home, really drive that their advantage, their ascendancy
I
home.
think that was my frustration on the second evening. So 188 for one, Lions off the field. Green's not been bowling that much this series. This is an opportunity to win the Test match this innings, and Hazelwood wasn't bowling particularly well. Stark at that point hadn't had that much an impact on the Test match. Or this is the chance now where England, the pitch is flat, score 500, win the Test match, knacker them out for the next one.
Yeah,
I guess that's what the frustration in that particular passage of play was. Obviously, that was overall a good day for England, but it could have been even better.
No, I completely get that. And I think, I don't know, there is a part of me that thinks, well, these guys are also, much as they had some miles in their legs, they were relatively fresh at that stage of the game and were bowling high 80s bouncers with a short ball field, and I don't know, it's not that easy. The alternative is probably not quite as easy as people were suggesting of just let it hit you or just get
Australia
underneath
were
it.
126 for 8 when trying not to play the hook shot.
Well, that's why the tactics worked for both sides as
against
well,
a
right?
slower bowling attack as well. So I mean, to be honest, in England's first innings, obviously Brooks' dismissal was terrible. One of the dismissals that actually really irritated me was Bairstow chipping incredibly tamely to mid-off. I thought,
and he almost did it 2 overs before with a slower ball that he didn't quite see.
Exactly,
and there was a limpness to the whole experience.
Where it felt like that whole innings was almost too much of a response the other way to me, where I thought that, it looked like he was someone who was thinking, well, I can't bat like these guys did, so I've got to do something else. And it sort of wasn't a very Bairstow innings in the end. And it felt incredibly soft when he just chipped a catch to mid-on even. So
it was funny how England's almost sort of comical 3-hour bumper barrage, or I don't know, potato gun barrage, whatever you want to call it, sort of ended up justifying what the batters had done the day before a little bit. It sort of highlighted that it was an unusual pitch. And Robinson in his column, I think he might even mention it later in the show, said it was a response to the pitch rather than a new tactic. But nonetheless, so successful was it for both teams that you do wonder if we are seeing a shift in strategy and tactics.
It might ruin the sport.
Sorry?
It might ruin the sport.
Well, the sport's ruined anyway, mate. Don't worry about that.
Test cricket.
Sport's ruined anyway.
I'm enjoying
We're enjoying the finale.
And I'm enjoying the extra anger as well. We actually haven't got to the bit of Paul's email that I really wanted to talk about. He's got a second
He's screaming
half.
at his radio.
Onto the classist comments. This really pissed me off. Yesterday and today, commentators including Cook, Vaughan, Strauss and others have labelled the reason why the crowd was louder and more passionate because it's a day 5 crowd, it's different kind of people. I'm sorry, didn't we just have a report and recommendations about classist language and behaviour in the sport? Again, these commentators could explain the noise of the crowd because some of them had just paid £25 instead of £200 for a ticket. All the Knights of the Realm judging the atmosphere of their precious lords. Saying things like this is more like Edgbaston or Headingley, as in this is full of less upper class lords, gents, and more actual people. I'm sorry, but this is the problem: the belief, conscious or subconscious belief, that certain places should be for certain people. It was a disgrace in my view. Make lords and cricket more affordable for everyone. Love the pod. Going to Headingley on Thursday. Can't wait. I think absolutely bang on. I think the thing that drew me mad was that the insinuation that people in on cheaper tickets were the issue when Australia made a formal complaint specifically about the members who were not in on 25 quid.
And also, how much better and louder was it? I said right at the start it was 6 times cheaper and 6 times louder. Those back-to-back boundary stakes hit right at the start of the day, I think was about as much as noise as the crowd had made, because people were in for 25 quid and actually wanted to be there and engage in the cricket rather than spending their ticket that they get in the summer and then standing out the back in the Harris Gardens for a couple of hours in the afternoon. And you see that bank of empty seats every single time at the end of the grandstand because it's where hospitality sit. And then on the last day, they'd move the Australian tour groups there. Then you had the England fans in the mound stand who were going mad because Stokes was peppering them. And I thought it made the whole thing a miles better spectacle than it would have
I've been at the Emirates in North London. You lot don't come out for the next 20 minutes after half time. Joe, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say the fact that those comments kind of slip out live on a broadcast without them even thinking that there might be something wrong in what they're saying is revealing and right at the crux of the whole issue itself there. I mean, I think given time to reflect, and if those words were put back at them, they might say, "Oh no, it's not quite what I meant." But it's come out for a reason, and these views are pretty deeply held, and I think they really sum up what we've got to fix, and what the ICEC report showed us over the last week or so.
100%. I mean, I want the media to stop calling Lords the home of cricket. Why I don't understand.
It's really boring as well.
It is
It's
boring.
just a boring cliche,
but I don't understand why Lords continue to get 2 tests a year when there are only 6 tests in the summer. So from next year, for example, the fixtures for 2024 are out. Lords gets a third of England matches. There's an Ashes summer coming up pretty soon. I think it's 2027, where there isn't a single Northern test. Yet Lords consistently gets 2, when obviously the Kia Oval always gets 1.
However, dear boy, on day 1 in the press box, my lunch was octopus and Gravlax salmon. And with all due respect to the northern provinces, you don't get that.
There was some debate about whether you should eat octopus. I mean, that'd be another thing I'd throw at Lords. But
Whoa.
Anyway.
I'm only kidding. But it's, firstly, I'm not kidding about what was actually on the plate. Incredible. It's been a mad few weeks, right? As mad as I can ever remember for cricket. Everybody suddenly is talking about it. It's right slap bang in the guts of the culture wars of the month and all of that. It's grimly fascinating to watch. And definitely, I think there's a sort of causal link between the madness, the feverish nature of the cricket, and the lunacy off the pitch. All right, it's a push to say that Stokes' declaration results in a bunch of chinless duffers having a go at a mild-mannered Asian lad after something entirely within the laws has taken place on the pitch. So it might be a push.
And nothing to do with
might be a push
to
argue that Rishi Sunak, who gives the longest interview of his premiership since he's been nominally in charge of the country, to an ex-Leicestershire seamer in the press box, and some sort of link to Alex Carey's right arm. I don't know. Maybe there's a shared Machiavellian appreciation of the dark arts there. I don't know. But it seems like the whole thing just feeds from one side to the other, right? And it's now whipped up. Marina Hyde's writing about it in The Guardian this morning. Piers Morgan's obviously doing Piers Morgan things. It seems like the whole culture is now just immersed in these 2 cricket matches, and it becomes increasingly funny when people start talking about, well, you know, we shouldn't have played that shot, should we? And we shouldn't have really, maybe he should bat 6 rather than 5, actually. And yet the broader story is just this wild circus that is kind of what we've always wanted. We've always wanted this, and now we've got it. We don't know what to do with it.
And yet, amidst all this hysteria, the whole thing could be done in 3 days. And
then we've
got the dampest squib of a summer.
Yeah.
And we'll have to be like, oh, which spinner are they going to bring in for the 5th test that no one had heard of at the start of the summer?
We'll do 25 minutes.
That's when we really come into our own, though. That's our stuff.
We haven't even talked about Brook at 3, have we? Have we talked about that?
I covered it with Butch.
Oh, fine. All right.
I think we're benefiting from nothing else really happening in the country right now. There's no sport that casual fans are interested in. The Women's Football World Cup hasn't started yet. I think they're playing warm-ups at the moment. We're miles away from Premier League football. There's nothing. I guess Wimbledon started, but you don't never really get a massive build-up.
Isha fronting it up, anchoring the show,
and I think we're benefiting from the weather's generally been pretty good and nothing's happening. So let's talk about the cricket.
It's obviously all the hundreds fault, but it is perfect window, isn't it, between the Champions League final and the Community Shield, which I think are the weekend either side of the first day of the series and the last day of the series.
We're all waiting with bated breath for the Community Shield.
Yeah. Next up, for the first time, Ollie Robinson joins us on the show
1-1.
in his capacity as a Wisden columnist over the Ashes. You might have read his first column that went out after the Edgbaston test. But before we go to Robinson, for this episode's Kia's Movement That Inspires moment, Kia is giving you the chance to watch the Ashes test against Australia at the Kia Oval on July 30th. Not only will you get to a 10-day 4 of the test match, but you can also watch it from the luxury of the Kia box. For a chance to win a pair of tickets, all you need to do is enter via the link in the description. So here is that chat between Ben Gardner and Ollie Robinson.
Let's just start with the emotions of another amazing test match. I mean, you had collapses, controversy, some interesting tactics, which we'll get to, some incredible individual performances. So what was it like to be part of, I guess, a second Ashes Classic in succession?
It was quite a strange sort of test match in the end, really. Like you say, it was very up and down for us. There were times where we felt like we were sort of going to win the game, times where we were on top, times where we thought we were going to lose in 4 days almost. So I think the thing that we've always said is let's try and put on a show, let's try and entertain people and sort of create that legacy that we've got as a team. And I think over the last 2 test matches, you've seen that from various individuals in the way that they played and the team in general and in the way that we're playing. And I think Stokesy's knock sort of summed up where we are as a team really and how we're trying to entertain the nation. Obviously, the results haven't quite gone our way, but we feel like we're quite close to getting a win and sort of getting back in the series.
Yeah, because I was reading your column before this, your first column, and you said that last week you said, I've faith in this team that if we went 2-0 down, we could still win 3-2. Is that kind of still how you feel and how the mood in the camp is, basically?
Yeah, definitely. I think we've won 3 in a row in Pakistan. We won 3 in a row last year. It's not like the team's not done it before, and I think there's a lot of confidence in the dressing room that we can do that. I think the pitches have almost suited the Australians a little bit more than maybe us, but I think we've obviously just got to deal with that and try and look at ways in which we can sort of be better and exploit that a bit better. Obviously we went short, but Lord's second innings, and I think they were 70 for 7. So there's definitely that belief in the camp that we can turn them over. It's just about going out there and doing it, really.
Yeah, the short ball stuff was really interesting because I don't know if you saw some of the stats that were saying that those 2 sessions were basically like the shortest sessions that have ever been bowled at least in Cricketers' database or whatever.
Yeah.
And you say it was so effective. Like, why was it so effective? Like, is it that teams should have been doing this more, or was there something specific in the conditions? And did you guys just execute it really well, or what was it? Do you think?
I think it was the pitch, to be honest. I think the Lord's pitch was very two-paced, and you saw some balls were flying through and Johnny was taking them above head height and others weren't even reaching him on the second bounce. And I think as a batter, that's really hard to line up. And when both teams are trying to score runs, I think it's really hard to I suppose, bat and score runs on those sort of wickets. I think you saw Cameron Green and Alex Carey apply themselves for a little bit and just leaving it and getting out of the way. But at some point there comes a crux, I suppose, where you have to decide if you're going to try and score runs or if you're just looking to survive. And I think they were obviously ahead of the game already, being 300 ahead. And I think they felt like they needed to keep scoring and keep taking it on. And I think that helped us in taking those wickets.
Yeah. And how is it for you, like, as a bowler? Because obviously, you know, you've got into the England team because you've bowled a certain type of way. You've got obviously loads of skills. Is it like the same satisfaction, I guess, when a guy sort of like top edges a hook to fine leg versus when you sort of nibble one on the takes the outside edge or goes and hits top of off or whatever?
I think it's a wicket is a great feeling regardless. I think the skill part of it doesn't feel as rewarding, but I think the effort side of it you get more reward for because you're putting your body through something that's a little bit harder, and you know that everyone in the team is backing you up, and every single bowler this week put in one of the probably the best shift I've seen from a unit in the sense of I think we bowled 250 bounces in a row or something, and I think to do that as a bowling attack was really, really pleasing, and to get the wickets for it was rewarding as well for us. So I think it's slightly different. I think when you sort of nick someone off or use your skill to get someone out, it's a different reward to maybe when you're bouncing someone and they hit one straight up. But I think at the end of the day, we're in the role to get wickets, and I think you can't moan too much about how you get them.
Yeah, and how has it been for you actually, like adjusting to it from like a sort of a physical point of view and like an effort point of view? Like maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like you just wouldn't have bowled like that for that long, basically ever before, and all of a sudden you're, you know, in an absolutely massive game, having to kind of almost figure out how to do it when you're there in a way. You know what I mean? In
county cricket, I've bowled long spells for Sussex, so I think the long spell side of it, I'm sort of quite adapted at doing. It's just the intensity in which you do it at test level is obviously that much higher. I think 18 months ago, 2 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to bowl a 9-over spell about bumpers. But I think I obviously trained quite hard the last 18 months. One, to get back in the team, and then two, once I got back in the team, to keep my place. And I think as a squad, we're at that environment where everyone's pushing each other to the max, and we've got bowlers lining up to come in. So if you're not doing the job, someone else will. And I think that's the sort of attitude that I've definitely got, and I think that keeps me going. And obviously to get to try and win a Test match for England as well is something that keeps me going. Even if I can't feel my legs, I still feel like that sort of want to win and putting the nation first is always going to get me through.
And how's your rhythm? I know you said that in the first test it wasn't like quite there, having not played as much cricket in the build-up. Is it getting back to where you'd want it to be?
Yeah, so end of their first innings this Test match, I felt like I'd sort of got it back a little bit. My speeds were a little bit more consistent. My sort of accuracy was a little bit better, but probably it's taken me a bit longer than it normally would. And I think I was fighting it and sort of fighting the want, I suppose, to really do well, maybe trying too hard. And then I've ended up relaxing into it a bit second innings, and I was a lot better. So hopefully going forward that will stay with me, and I feel like I'm in a good place now.
The two main things, like the game, I guess, were the Carey Bairstow thing and the Stokes thing. I guess let's start with Alex Carey and Johnny Bairstow. I mean, we've heard from lots of people what they think of it. I guess first of all, what was your just immediate reaction to it when it happened?
Well, I was obviously next after Broady, so I saw him throw his stumps down and they gave it out. So I was getting my whites on and getting padded up for sort of 5-10 minutes, and I just in a bit of shock really initially to what happened. And then it wasn't until sort of 15-20 minutes later when I realised and watched it again how sort of weird I suppose it was. Johnny obviously wasn't attempting a run, he wasn't trying to get any advantage, and I think they'd obviously seen something. I've read a few comments that they'd seen him obviously do it a few balls before. It's a fine line, isn't it, between getting someone out in that way and the spirit of cricket. And I know Stokesy has said that if she was on the other foot, we would have called him back. But it was just a really weird situation at such a vital point in the game, and I think sometimes emotions can get the better of people. And in such a big series, I think it's understandable.
Yeah, so it almost sounds as if you're maybe a bit less hard-line than some of the other players who, or McCann as well, saying they'll definitely regret it and that sort of thing. Do you kind of see it as more as it's kind of like an individual thing, and it's how an individual captain feels in either way is sort of fine in a way, depending on if you're consistent?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I feel like if it was if the England team now did it, I think we would have a majority vote that would call the batter back. I think the way we want to play and the way that we want to win games of cricket, that's not the way that we want to do it. But at the same time, laws and rules are there to be played to, and the fact that the laws state it's out, I don't think you can have too many arguments about that side of it. I just think the question is obviously the spirit of the game and in which way you want to play the game.
Yeah. Does it frustrate you at all when that's so much talked about when the cricket was amazing as well? Or do you think that it's sort of like, it's natural people are going to want to talk about something like that?
I think there's always something that people want to talk about, isn't there? Obviously, the first test, it was me and Khawaja. The second test is this incident and Stokes' amazing knock. I think there's always going to be things that people pick up on. It's a shame that the game as a whole hasn't been sort of spoken about much, because it was another absolute thriller. And I think in both of the first two games that we played, you've seen some great Test cricket, some really exciting finishes, and other things have taken the limelight. And I think for us to get cricket into the place that we want it to be and create this legacy that we want to create, we need to speak about how good the games have been and how exciting people have found them, not about little incidents that in the grand scheme of things don't really affect how cricket's going to be played in years to come. I think it's just obviously people pick with the Bairstow incident, people feel hard done by on the England side, and I've seen a few articles from the Australians where they think we're spitting our dummies out. So it's always going to be that way in sport. You've got two teams and you're always going to have people that agree and disagree.
Yeah, well, let's talk then about one of those things the game should be remembered for, which is that Stokes innings. I mean, he's obviously done similar things before, but I maybe not so much with you. I mean, he's done brilliant things with you in the team, but this was another level maybe. What's it like, especially, you just padded up to go into bat next, and then that's when he kind of flicks the switch. What's it like watching from the balcony when he's doing something like that?
Yeah, I mean, the first 10-15 minutes after Johnny got out really sort of captivating. I think we were all watching Broady at one end, getting stuck into the Aussies, watching Stokesy at the other end, whacking it all over the place. And it was just one of those moments where I don't think we appreciated it at the time, how good it really was. And then it's not to sit back a bit. And obviously I was in next, so I had some nerves anyway. It's not until you sit back and really realise how good it was until you appreciate it a bit more. I think that was probably better than his head. Well, it definitely was better than the knock he played at Headingley. I think the way he commanded the whole innings was incredible. I don't think you will ever see another cricketer like that for a long time. And I've seen people speak about other sportsmen who have obviously done that for their game. I think Stokesy's doing it for our game of cricket. I think he's capturing imaginations and making people want to play cricket when they grow up. I think everyone at the moment wants to be Ben Stokes, and so do I. So it's just an amazing thing to watch and experience and be a part of.
Yeah. Can you almost sense, I know you went out in the middle with him, but you've been like around. Can you sense a change in him when he's like gearing up one of those things? Or is he kind of like the same person and it happens to be that he's smashing everything for six?
I think before he goes into bat, he's always the same person. I think it wasn't until the Johnny incident when I thought, Stokes is not really the guy you want to fire up, because he will take you apart. And in the next 2 hours, he proceeded to take their bowlers apart. I think it's sometimes people have got that switch in them where they go into a different gear, and Stokesy did that on Sunday. And I think for an hour or so, you saw the Aussies lose the plot a little bit, really, and didn't know what to do, where to bowl. And I think that's just the power and the impact that Stokesy has on the cricket field. But yeah, it was just incredible to watch, and it was a shame that he obviously couldn't get us all the way, but I think it's one of the best knocks I've ever seen in my life.
I guess let's touch a bit more on the stuff just like around the Ashes. First, I mean, it's probably worth talking about the reaction to your column last week, which a lot of people enjoyed. A lot of people had their opinions on it. How much do you sort of look at what other people are saying? Every Australia ex-pros played the game was having their say. Do you ignore that? Do you find it quite funny? What's your kind of reaction to that, I guess?
Yeah, I've read little bits. I just found it funny how they were getting so swept up by it, really. I think, like I said it in my interview in the media after the game, that like they were the Aussies that were commenting, and when they played, they're exactly the same. And for them to get so caught up in something, I think just shows how big the Ashes is for people, and how much it means to people. And I think obviously we're trying to get cricket back on the map as big as possible and create this huge want and love for the game again. I think although the comments were directed at me and not the nicest for me to read, I still think it gives cricket that publicity, and it makes it interesting, I suppose, for some fans as well.
Yeah, and is there an element now, you talk about like publicity and it's because it's the Ashes, and I was thinking this watching the Stokes innings as well, that like it almost felt that there was like an even greater focus because the Ashes were now on the line. Do you kind of expect that to sort of come up in the next three games, that you've done lots of entertaining things, but equally at this point the most entertaining thing is kind of if the series is 2-2 heading to the final test? Does that is there a refocusing there at all of like, okay, now it's obviously always been serious, but now it's like this is do or die kind of thing?
I think so, yeah. I think obviously Baz has said to us that results aren't the be all and end all, and what we're trying to create is the bigger picture. And if we get to that place where we can perform and entertain, then results should take care of themselves. And I think there is a factor now where we have to sort of put all of that, the last two games, behind us and concentrate on this game. Obviously, we've done a lot of entertaining, like you say, but I think now it's really time for us to knuckle down and try and keep the series alive. I think the guys understand that, and I don't think you're going to see any change in the way we play, but I think there's definitely that bigger picture now, and more sort of understanding that we really need to pull something out the bag for this game to keep it going. The messages have still been the same from Ben and Baz. They're still, let's go out there, entertain, play aggressive cricket. So I don't think you're going to see any change there, but there's definitely that real focus that sort of this is it. We need to really, really perform and pull it out of the bag. And I don't think we're too far away. I think Aussies have probably played to quite high in their potential, and I think we're still searching for that game where we don't miss any chances and batters get hundreds instead of 50s, and bowlers are consistent the whole game. I think we haven't really put together a solid game yet. I think there's been a lot of sort of mistakes from all parties really in terms of the team, and I think if we can string together some serious performances this game and the next two games, I think there's a good chance that it'll be two all going into the Oval.
Yeah, and then the final thing, just the news broke just about an hour ago, was just obviously gutting for Ollie Pope to be missing the series. I mean, not just as a batter, but as a leader as well as vice captain. I guess firstly, yeah, just in him that must be really tough for him to take, I guess.
Yeah, and I spoke to him yesterday. Sent him a good luck message in the morning because I only had a scan at 9, and just said hope it goes well. And he texted me at 3 saying not good news, and just initial thought was absolutely gutted for him. Like, he's an integral part of the squad, the team. He's obviously the vice captain now, and he's loved by every single person in that dressing room. And to not have him in the team, it's going to be a massive miss for us. Not just on the cricket field, as a person, as a guy in the changing room as well. It's going to leave a big hole. So it's going to be tough for the boys to not have him with us. But I think we can use that and really use that to drive us forward and do it for Popey as well as obviously the nation.
Yeah, cool. Nice one. Well, that was everything I had.
Perfect. Thank you very much, mate.
Nice one. Cheers.
Speak soon. Thanks.
Australia won the first game in the T20I leg of the Women's Ashes. The series could actually be done by this evening. The second game is here tonight. Australia haven't lost a white ball game in 39 matches. England need to win 5 in a row to take the series.
Up against it.
Australia won the first T20I by 4 wickets with 1 ball remaining. The England innings stuttered a bit as a half century from Dunkley before Amy Jones whacked a quick 40 to get England to a competitive total, which Australia just about chased after a late stumble of their own. Joe, do England have a chance?
Oh, I can't really say yes, can I? No, I don't think so. It's been very frustrating, and it's probably been exactly how we thought it would play out, in that England have got some talented players and they fight hard and they push Australia to a point. But when you get to that point, you always expect Australia to come good. And the first T20 was a really good example of that. England probably a little bit under par, probably about 10 under par, I'd have said. But against Australia, they're probably 30 under par. Then they bowl really well to get themselves back in the game. And that Australian batting lineup just keeps on coming. So much depth there. And they get over the line in the final over. And it's hard to see England winning more than 1, maybe 2 of the remaining games, just because of that depth of quality that Australia have. There are just so few frailties, and England, unfortunately, still do have quite a lot of weaknesses that they haven't solved. And I don't think there's no shame in that, but the problem is the setup of the women's international game means that the Australia games are always going to be the things we focus on. And they're just a very, very hard side to beat. You know, they're the best women's team in the history of the game, I would say, undeniably by this point. And England have to try and beat them. And it's a tricky game.
I thought it wasn't a great look that the first T20I in front of a packed crowd at Edgbaston started while the men's test was still going on at Lord's. Like, I'm just really not sure who that serves.
So not very... I didn't know it was on free to air until I was on the BBC site and saw that I could watch it. As I tuned in for the start of it, which I thought the BBC could have done more there, or just been more publicity of the fact it was a free-to-air game. It's a big deal.
West Indies will definitely not be at the 2023 World Cup after their loss to Scotland at the qualifier late last week or early this week. If you want some authoritative analysis on the demise of West Indies, check out one of our podcasts from last week where we had Santoki from the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, who was excellent. For a World Cup without West Indies just feels wrong.
Deeply. Yeah, but you reap what you sow from the ICC's point of view. At least they've begun to, correct their mistake in the first place. And as Ben Gardner writes in the upcoming magazine, you have to put a big asterisk against this whole 10-year period, really, of a contracted, squeezed, and therefore less reflective World Cup. It's one of the bizarre dichotomies, or whatever you want to call it, of modern cricket, that you have associate nations on their uppers, living on their wits, becoming better and better, and the established nations, certainly on the edges, weakening, and yet you don't have a platform upon which they can play each other. At least, as I say, from 2027, it's 14 teams, and I think from next year, the T20 tournament is 20 teams, albeit with that slightly two-tiered, unsatisfying kind of qualification period before the big boys turn up. Nonetheless, at least there is a recognition that they ballsed up in the first place. But yeah, look, in the short term, you get to October and everybody's favourite second team, the team that created one-day cricket, really, in terms of it being the kind of thing that you can hang a game on, they won't be there. But in their place will be a team on merit, right?
Mm. Well,
if you go for it, Matt. But just looking over that tournament, it's yet another powerful example of the talent and the passion, the energy that is out there.
It's a brilliant thing that, having effectively designed a tournament specifically so that it would be full of full members, there is a guaranteed associate nation in there, because Scotland's win against Zimbabwe knocked them out yesterday. Ireland are already out and West Indies are out as well. So it's either Scotland or Netherlands to fill that last spot as an associate, which is a pretty extraordinary thing when you consider the funding structures and just how little money those guys are going to get over the next 4 years. And particularly when you think about how eroded their fixture lists are as well. I mean, those guys have basically no bilateral cricket scheduled because they're not part of the Future Tours program. They're doing ad hoc stuff. They're seeing what ICC come up with for, what might happen in the next cycle over a particular period of time. But that's all getting done on the fly at the moment. So the fact that you're going to have a European team in there, an associate, is huge, really, and also highlights just how backward looking the ICC's decision was in the first place.
And especially remarkable given that both teams, Scotland, Netherlands particularly so, are missing so many first team players who are just playing county cricket.
Yeah, looking at that Scotland team yesterday, Brad Wheel's got a stress fracture, but Josh Davey is playing for Somerset, and Michael Jones, their opening bat and bowler, between them he's playing for Durham in the Blast and David's playing for Somerset in the Blast. So
the fact that cricketer, Michael Jones, by the way,
and so they're probably their two opening bowlers and their opening batter down, and yet are managing to turn over Zimbabwe in Zimbabwe, and will probably actually be, I don't know, hopefully quite a competitive team at that World Cup. It probably conditions might not suit them, but especially when you look at the performance of Chris Soule, who I know you were getting pretty excited about. Yeah,
big time.
He was hitting 150 Ks yesterday, I think.
So it's genuinely fascinating. So Billy asked, how does Scotland have a bowler that was quicker than anything that England produced in the first two Test matches? By the way, it's not close. So Soule's 29. He was genuinely bowling between 90 and 94 miles per hour. So quite often we talk about 90 mile per hour bowlers, and these guys have maybe once touched 90 miles per hour.
And they bowl 86, basically.
Bowl 86.
Josh Tongue is 90 mile an hour sometimes.
Exactly. Or, Gus Atkinson literally once touched 90 miles per hour, and I thought he should play for England after that. Soule was actually bowling between 90 and 94 miles per hour. I'd say only Mark Wood in the UK bowls that fast or faster. And he just blew away the actually very good Zimbabwe top order, beating them for pace. So Sean Williams has been the player of the tournament. And Soule just bowled a ball that was too quick for him. And it's an amazing opening combination because, as Matt says, the kind of regular opening bowlers aren't there. So you've got Soule bowling 93 miles per hour at one end, and then you've got this guy who is called Brendan McMullen at the other, who's an all-rounder who bats three. He's been opening the bowling. He bowls 75 miles per hour, keeper up, ring field. Just hooping it in miles. There's an extraordinary difference between the two opening bowlers, and both of them are taking loads of wickets. And I think it's just because of how different it is where Soule gets the wickets because of pace. And the other guys, I think, can't believe that McMullen's so much slower, and he's very, very skillful. But
it's going to be so good if they give one of the big boys a scare in October, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can you imagine they turn up to Bangalore and play India and just get 10 for 3 after 5 overs?
Yeah. I mean, he's genuinely capable of it. So Scotland play Netherlands tomorrow, and can afford to lose by 30 runs or 5 overs if Netherlands bat second and still qualify for that 10-team tournament.
There shouldn't be so much jeopardy on this qualifying tournament because we would all like to see more teams in the tournament proper. But the result is it's a thrilling tournament, but really competitive games where pretty much everyone can beat everyone within reason. Some really high scores, some really good cricket. It's a great advert for associate cricket and the kind of lesser full members, and really just exposes the folly of the decision to cut it to 10 teams in the first place.
And also, I think just worth saying that Zimbabwe are just amazing hosts. So you're getting packed crowds who are getting so into it.
That's the one disappointment for me. I've got a real soft spot for them, and it would have been great.
Real shame they didn't get through. I mean, obviously, it's a
to
great
see
story for Scotland, but Zimbabwe need this. You could argue they all need it, but Zimbabwe's had a tough old time of it.
Joe, what's your moment of the week?
It's a bit self-indulgent, this one, actually.
Bring it on.
You would say that. It's actually my Sunday afternoon with Phil. It felt kind of faintly ridiculous that while the eyes of the cricketing world were trained on Lords, Phil, me and Hen Cowan were here at the Oval commentating on Surrey v Essex in the Blast. But having said that, it was a big game. Essex needed to win to have any chance of getting to the quarterfinals. Surrey were desperate to win to get a home tie. We were trying our best to concentrate on it as much as we could, but equally we had Ben Stokes going wild at the same time.
It was funny. It was good. Again, like 15,000 people in. That's 2/3 full at least. And I didn't know what was happening at north of the river, but you heard it. You heard it at the Oval. You heard everyone just go, "Oh, for fuck's sake!" And you just heard the whole crowd wearily respond because clearly it was all in their ear. It was strange. It was strange trying to focus on the job in hand.
The moment itself.
Well, it turned into an amazing game. So Surrey got about 190, and then Essex came flying out of the traps. Dan Lawrence batting beautifully. A bit of pathos there for Phil, seeing Lawrence do that for Essex against his future teammates. And Michael Pepper at the other end actually outscored Lawrence, played brilliantly, got them so far ahead of the rate that the game was almost done. I didn't even think I was going to get another commentary stint. I thought Phil and Hen were going to bring it home. And then Essex kind of just combusted, looked like they were desperately trying to lose a game they'd already won. Wickets started falling, playing ridiculous shots. Then it came down to the final ball. Feroz Kushi, the homegrown youngster, who had played very calmly whilst everyone else around him was going completely nuts. Was it 3 he needed off the final ball?
That was it, Joe.
And launched it towards us, long on boundary for 6. Chris Jordan tries to catch the ball. He's falling over the boundary. You think, because it's Jordan, you think he's going to pull it off. He manages to get a proper hand on the ball. He's going over the boundary ropes, tries to throw it back, but can't quite get enough energy on the ball to throw it to Jamie Overton to complete the catch. And Essex hit 6 off the final ball to go through to the quarterfinals. They're playing Birmingham away on Thursday, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just a brilliant end to a game that felt like a sideshow at the start of it. And also just a lot of fun sitting there with Phil and Hen, 3/4 of the All Out Cricket editorial team. Who would have thought 10 years ago that we would have been holding the fort at
We've really
Surrey.
come on in life, haven't we?
Yeah. We just need to get Ed Kemp on board next time.
I sent in the link. I sent Kempy the link.
You've got to find the call of the last ball on Twitter. It's brilliant.
Phil was very much the number one, the lead commentator, although did unfortunately a piss at one point. So I was then thrust into the number one position briefly. I don't know if that happened with Aggers and Vic Marks, but
I wrote out an email to H and Joe. Do an over. I need a piss. It's an iconic
absolute
moment.
pro.
Yeah.
Just one thought on that. It did strike me when someone leant over and said that Notts had started well while Stokes was smacking start for back-to-back sixes. There are quite a few county cricketers who have missed basically all the good moments of the England team over the past however long because they've been playing. Because there was a round of championship games on the day of the World Cup final in 2019.
Okay.
There was a round of championship games going on during Headingley as well in 2019. Obviously, the end of the Edgbaston Test was during the start of a round of T20 Blast games. I think Surrey were playing at the Oval as that finished. Maybe that was not a good moment, but it was at least a memorable moment. And then during Stokes' innings as well, people were playing in the Blast. So there must be quite a big proportion of players who have been on all 4 of those days have actually been playing cricket and had no idea what was going on.
Just to run through what we've got coming up in the Blast: Birmingham versus Essex, Lancashire, Surrey, Somerset, Notts, Hampshire, Worcestershire. I'll run through some other county news. Ravi Bopara has been released by Sussex. He's had an excellent season skippering them, and in the press release, Bopara sounded surprised by the news.
That's
He got
one word
100
for
in
it.
100 in his penultimate game and then let go.
Yeah.
He should never. I'm not being. I am. Should never have left. Should never have left Essex, and he knew it at the time. He flounced out a bit. He's back on form in the Essex side by the end of the season, but the decision had already been made. The contract had already been signed. He should never have left in the first place.
Any chance he'll go back?
I don't know, but possibly. I'm going
I
to
won't
ask
be
the
that
question.
surprised.
Wouldn't be a shock, thinking that, Lawrence, who's dead to me, he's going the other way. It's not impossible.
Prithvi Shaw is joining Northants.
Yeah, how good's that?
He averages over 50 and strikes at 123 in List A cricket, so I think he'll go okay in the Royal London. He's also going to be available for quite a lot of the county championship, which should be very exciting. And then some sad news, Sakeem Mahmood has picked up another stress fracture, which means that his season is over. His run of luck with injury, I think, is as grim as anyone. Is on a par with Archer, really. He's played so little cricket, and he's now 26 years old.
He was actually as well. I remember at the start of the 2022 summer, just around the time Stokes was being appointed as captain, I think he was someone who had really impressed Stokes on that tour of the Caribbean. I remember I remember speaking to him at a media day at the start of last summer and sort of talking through how he'd had an opportunity to go to the IPL as a replacement and had a chat over breakfast with Stokes about it, who obviously was at the time saying, we need guys to really be focusing on Test cricket. This needs to be everything. So Mahmood had said, right, I'm going to play in the Championship and get myself ready for selection for the first game of the summer. Then obviously probably a few weeks after then, did the back for the first time, and since then it's been a pretty grim run of luck, really. And yeah, as you say, he's got to that point where he's mid-20s, and suddenly you got to make that step from being promising to being the real thing. So I suppose there's the constant example that fast bowlers will cling to of Pat Cummins, that it doesn't have to be the end, but it is obviously really, really grim news for him.
Somerset's Ben Green has been one of the players of the tournament so far, the joint leading wicket-taker in the competition. I spoke to him about his and Somerset's season. He's really good on what it takes to be a good death bowler, and doing so whilst plying your trade at the smallest ground in the country. We're joined by Ben Green, who's been one of the key players in Somerset's exceptional Blast group stage so far. Ben, you're the joint leading wicket taker in the Blast so far. You've had such a good season with the ball in particular. Are you doing anything different this season compared to what you've done in the past?
Nothing drastically different, I don't think. I think it was obviously a case of trying to make the right decisions at the right times early on in the comp, getting lucky as T20 sometimes goes, and guys spooning a few up to me. But on the whole, not a whole lot different, just trying to get a bit smarter with some decisions, I suppose.
You obviously play your home games at one of the smallest grounds in the country. Do you do anything different at Taunton, or how do you think that's affected your development as a bowler? I mean, it's a much smaller ground than some of the bigger men's test venues, for example.
Yeah, I suppose, as you say, Taunton's obviously the smallest ground in the country, highest scoring T20 ground in the world. So, yeah, there's a few challenges as a bowler there. I think the key, what I'm trying to do is to not be predictable, because as soon as someone lines you up there, then you've got every chance of going over the rope for six. And also the one thing, the default option at Taunton is always to try and bowl a Yorker. Because if you get a Yorker in, no one can hit that for six. So I suppose those are the two things that bowling at Taunton a lot has taught me.
Is there anyone in the world, in the T20 world, who's bowling you look up to almost as a model for what you can produce and are looking to produce?
Not overly, if I'm honest. Obviously, there's a lot of guys out there that you admire for certain things, like even playing this competition. The way that Jordan's bowled of the death against us a few times, that's obviously admirable. The way that, as I said, getting your Yorkers in at Taunton, he's probably one of the best to do that. And then you've got guys like Nathan Ellis, for example, who's got that unbelievable slow ball. Like, that's something where if you've got an asset like that, then again you become unpredictable and difficult to pick. So you have bigger margins. So far this year, probably those two guys have impressed me the most, and trying to almost replicate a bit of what they do.
How do you improve as a death bowler? Because I remember kind of what you were saying earlier, and I remember during the T20 World Cup, people were talking about what Sam Curran does really well, and a lot of people picking up that he's just very good at making decisions kind of on the spot as he's running into bowl. How is that something that you work on improving, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so obviously there's an execution element. So you've got to be able to execute the ball that you want to bowl. It's probably first and foremost. And then I suppose part of it is being adaptable in the acts of bowling. You know what I mean? So most of the time at the death, people obviously think unless there's a huge boundary, it's going to be a lot of Yorkers. And in the modern day and age, like, a lot of people are scooping now. You might have to be adaptable, that if you see someone go, just roll your fingers on it, try and bowl it as slow. Well, that's what I do, try and bowl it as slow as possible. But yeah, as you say, it's kind of trying to make the right decisions based on your strengths, as in your own strengths, the ground, the batter's strengths. Like, what's he going to try and do? Is he more of a power player? He's going to try and stand there and whack it, or is he trying to deflect me? And go from there, really. And then ultimately just trust your gut and just go with whatever decision stands out.
There's obviously so much data around T20 cricket in particular at the moment. Are you someone who pays particular attention to detail in terms of where batters' strengths are, etc.?
I do. Yeah, I do like a bit of homework, I suppose. But yeah, so our analyst, he puts together some articles for us about every batter, like red zones, green zones, where they're strong and not. And I'll briefly flick through them. It won't take up a large part of my day, but I'll gauge what I think is the best thing to do for each of them. And then again, marry that up with what I think my strengths are and go from there.
Somerset have had this historically good group stage. What do you put that down to? I was watching you guys beat Surrey the other night, and it looked like there's a real clear role clarity for everyone in your team in a way that not every team might have.
Yeah, I mean, you probably, if you look at the team, we've probably only played 13 or 14 players, I'm guessing. Or maybe even a few more now. But yeah, as you say, we've got great clarity in our roles, and even the guys that are coming in, they know exactly what they're going to do. I think it also is part of the factor of playing at Taunton. You know, I think there is a bit of a fear factor with teams coming here, in the fact that they know it's going to be high scoring. So with the bat, they potentially sometimes go too hard and lose too many wickets. And with the ball, they panic a bit, and they're like, so I think that plays into our favour. And, you know, we've got some incredibly talented players. I think that obviously always helps. In the last few years, we've had guys go on and play for England, but also be ridiculous throughout the group stage. And we've done that this year without even Riley, who we had last year. And obviously Pepsi's come in and been incredibly dominant as well. So explosive and experienced, I suppose.
Just to clarify, by Pepsi, you mean Tom Cadmore?
Yeah,
right,
sorry,
yes.
yeah.
And then in terms of like moving on beyond the blast, is the hope now to pick up franchise deals during the winter? Is that something that you're now more consciously looking forward to?
I would obviously love to be involved in that. I think that would be a great stepping stone for myself as a cricketer. A bit more experience in and around different environments. I feel like that would be great. I'm not holding my breath over any of that. As I said, I love to be involved, but you never know.
Well, thanks a lot for your time, Ben. Best of luck in the quarterfinals and best of luck for the rest of the season. Matt, Green was sort of surprisingly not one of the 100 wildcard picks that was released this week. There was some... I struggled to get my head around this list. So the notable omissions including Jake Linter and Matt Parkinson, both of whom had good 100 campaigns recently. And there's Southern Brave picked up Jaffa Chauhan at Yorkshire, who's barely played professional cricket and he's done okay. But yeah, how does it work? Because I struggle to get my head around some of them.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, the first thing to say is, by all accounts, the whole process is often quite a bit of a shambles. Like, by all accounts, the draft was meant to start an hour before it did yesterday, but some team was trying to say so-and-so was injured and we need this guy in before the draft, and it didn't happen. And everyone was basically waiting for an argument to finish between Manchester Originals and whoever was running it from the ECB side. So it is a little bit chaotic. I think the other thing is probably just, and this is probably like a general rule of thumb for following auctions and drafts in short form cricket, is that often the takeaways are sort of a bigger picture of how could no team collectively want this guy, whereas often there will be a specific reason that a specific team wants a certain role rather than necessarily a player. So someone like Ben Green, I completely agree. I was surprised that he didn't get picked up. But then looking through, there were very, very few, if any, seam bowling all-rounders who got taken at the draft. So it's not like there was someone who you could necessarily identify who had got the nod ahead of him. Also, I suppose there's probably the element of he, as he says there, has bowled a lot of the death this year. And Somerset have taken a lot of early wickets. I think they've taken by a distance the most wickets in the comp. So maybe there's some sort of perception that he's bowling mainly at lower order batters. But yeah, it definitely is strange. And I agree, especially when you consider that Parkinson was playing a test match just over a year ago and also was in England's one-day plans because he played a couple of T20 internationals against India almost exactly a year ago, I think. It's pretty extraordinary that he is going to be playing for Lancs in the 50 over Cup rather than in the 100.
Matt, you have a new book out. What is it? What is it about?
I will show the YouTube viewers White Hot with Tim Wigmore from the Daily Telegraph. It's the inside story of England's double world champions.
Smart partnering with Wigmore. That's like
the machine.
It's like collaborating with Jay-Z. You got guaranteed hit there.
I do consider there's a certain partnership there. Yeah.
Do you reckon that's the first time Wigmore's been compared to Jay-Z?
I would say there's a very high chance. I reckon they're probably slightly different people to work with in terms of the process.
I imagine so, but geniuses in their own way.
Yeah. But no, we brought White Hot out a couple of weeks ago, published by Bloomsbury and available in all good bookshops. It's basically the journey that England took from being a second-rate white ball team in the years running up to 2015, with one exception really in 2010, to being what they are currently, which is reigning world champions in both white ball formats, the first men's team to achieve that, and it sort of charts that journey we hope in a sort of thematic way rather than chronological. So we're not just saying here's 2015 and year by year. It's more certain themes that emerge. So destigmatizing risk in the batting, embracing difference with the ball. So no longer being a team of full 80 mile an hour seamers and an off spinner, and having a left armer, having genuine pace, all that sort of thing. And then sort of charting the team's evolution as well. So obviously there's been quite a big change in personnel over the years between 2015, the team that first played against New Zealand, to the team that won at the MCG against Pakistan in the T20s. And I think, as much as anything, getting to a point where, much as you could see, it wouldn't be a huge shock if England only made the semi-finals of this World Cup, but it feels as though that there's such a baked-in way that England play one-day cricket. We talk a bit about the idea that of England DNA, which quite a few people at the ECB are talking about now. That there's such a style and such an obvious way that they play that it's quite hard to see how England will give up the position that they currently have and won't, the idea that they're going to go back to the point where they were in 2015, where it was a secondary consideration, and getting knocked out of tournaments early is a matter of course. It feels a long way off.
Everyone talks about that 2015 New Zealand series as being pivotal, coming up against that New Zealand team that played almost what England eventually played themselves. What other moments would you say in that journey, I guess particularly from 2015 to 2019, would you say were crucial in the development of that side?
Well, I think there's a few. I think some on the field, some off the field. I think the things that are sort of immediately springing to mind, I think the Champions Trophy in 2017 was pretty big. There was a massive focus, especially in the first 2 years, on playing fearless cricket and playing in a new style. And I think there was a sort of big overcorrection in the semi-final against Pakistan, where they went completely into their shells because they figured the pitch was going to be difficult. And then in the next 2 years, then sort of had the opportunity to try and refine that. Trevor Bayliss, who we spoke to for the book, sort of spoke a lot about trying to get across this idea of being aggressive and smart, and trying to find the balance between the two, which isn't always easy.
And very relevant.
It was very relevant. And to be honest, actually, since you bring it up, I think there's a lot of parallels between the two teams because, originally it's very easy to sort of say that's the way we play when you're trying to instill a new brand, a new style of cricket on a team. But obviously you need to evolve that over time, because otherwise, if you just play in a single style, then you can become predictable and teams will work out how to counteract it.
You were saying that the confidence and trust given to players like Roy and Hales, who you spoke to for the book, is really quite similar to what England have done with Crawley and Duckett. Yeah,
absolutely. So one of the things, I think they've obviously spoken about it before, but probably not revealed quite the extent of it in terms of the backing they had, Roy and Hales, where they said both of them brought it up sort of their own accord rather than being prompted, said, when we went into that series against New Zealand in 2015, we were told, you're getting the full year. And that was a series that started in June. So they were basically told, you will play the next 14 ODIs as long as you keep playing the way that you do for your respective counties. And Roy was pretty open and said at the start, I had imposter syndrome. I didn't think I was good enough. He obviously whacked the first ball of the cycle to point.
And they were thrilled with that, weren't they?
Yeah, famously. But he really struggled at the start. And I think he averaged 19 against New Zealand. He didn't have a great time against Australia at the end of the summer as well, but sort of gradually grew into it. And then got 100 in the UAE against Pakistan, and obviously established himself. And
you say there's some stuff with Hales, first person stuff with Hales. Does he talk about his own collapse much?
In terms of
him finding himself out the team on the eve of the World Cup because he was a naughty boy.
Less so in this book. I mean, I've spoken to him about it in the past, which obviously sort of informs the character that we try and put across with him. He was quite open about that actually during the Pakistan tour, just when he was coming back, and sort of saying, talking about the drive from Cardiff, where they had the training base in 2019, back home to Nottingham, and being, the longest drive of his life and feeling like he'd let everyone down. We obviously talk a bit about the sort of reintegration back into the team. And I think there's some stuff in there about Mott's phone calls to Bayliss and sort of getting a character reference. But to be honest, I think the key thing there, as most people know, was the Morgan captaincy change. And I think that was the vital element of that. There's also there's a sort of narrative that I remember came up at the time about how Hales had, when he found out that he wasn't going to be in the squad, had rung up Rob Key, and there was this sort of famous conversation where Hales had a bit of a go and said, are you really telling me that this guy's a better player than I am at T20 cricket in Australia? And Key sort of put his case across, and how when Bairstow then got injured, that was a big part of it. And Key, who again we spoke to, said, I want to make it really clear that wasn't the reason that Hales got called up. All it did was meant that whenever anyone isn't in a squad now, they think that they should call me up and have a go. So,
Matt, I was interested in the process. Presuming you had a deal for this before they won the T20 World Cup.
It all happened quite quickly. We sort of originally pitched the idea during the final week of it.
Okay.
And the deal came through fairly soon after the final.
Right. So you turned it around quickly.
Yeah,
you must have been delighted when they won that final.
It was. I mean, I think the timing was quite fortunate for us in that England didn't have a lot of cricket going on at the start of this year in particular. Which meant we could sort of fit it in around day jobs, and also that a lot of people were quite willing to chat. A few Zoom calls with people who were in soulless hotel rooms playing the IL T20 and that sort of thing. But lots of people were extremely generous with their time, and I think that's probably what makes the book what it is the insight we got from speaking to so many of the people who have been so intimately involved for 7 years. And to be honest, I think some of the best bits are from people that wouldn't necessarily associate with the team specifically, if that makes sense. So someone like Joe Root gave a brilliant interview to Tim, where obviously Root, as England captain, has given so many interviews about the Test team and stuff that doesn't involve himself. But to hear him talking about his one-day cricket, the moment after the Under-19 World Cup in 2010, when Mark Robinson, who was the coach, took him to one side for his appraisal and said, you know, you're not going to get in the Yorkshire white ball team, let alone the England one, the way you currently play, and sort of his response to all that sort of thing, then charting his journey through to being England's leading run scorer in the 2019 World Cup. I thought that was some of the best stuff, actually.
Just in terms of going back to the beginning, who was the brains behind it, in the same way that kind of comparing it to how everything changed with the Test team at a very specific moment? We kind of know who the main architects were for the Test team. Who were the equivalents back in 2015?
I think that the four names that came through more than any were Morgan, Strauss, Farbrace and Bayliss. I think Farbrace had a pretty big role, especially early on. He was the interim coach and was sort of almost Bayliss's conduit almost, because Bayliss was unavailable for that first series at the end of the IPL and was still at home, but Farbrace was very much speaking to him the whole time and getting across his points of view, and they were pretty closely aligned to it. Strauss obviously came in with a pretty clear vision of what he wanted to do, which I think actually at the time, looking back, got quite clouded because of the fact that the early days of Strauss's tenure were all about KP from the media's point of view, whereas I think internally almost all of the discussions were, we've been terrible at this one-day World Cup, what are we going to do so that we don't embarrass ourselves in 4 years' time when we host it, and how are we going to actually compete in it? And looking back at the time, I couldn't believe this, but there were quite a few stories and reports about Root being the obvious choice as ODI captain in 2015, and you know, Morgan's form wasn't great. He'd obviously captained at the 2015 World Cup, and saying, you know, England should obviously sack him and appoint Joe Root as a stepping stone to being Alistair Cook's successor, whereas, you know, it seems like a ridiculous thing to suggest now, but I think there was quite a sort of, I think that was quite a popular opinion, whereas Strauss saw it very differently and said we need more separation between the two teams. Looked pretty closely and commissioned a lot of research from Nathan Lehman on drivers for success in Cricket World Cups, and had the sort of, I suppose, the unique position as an ex-England captain and also director of cricket. So he had the sort of credibility to drive that through that maybe some other people who have held that role in the past might not have. So I think those are the four. And obviously Morgan, you know, I think most people will know the role that he played as a leader and someone who had a pretty clear focus and clear drive and clear philosophy as much as anything on how he thought one-day cricket needed to be played.
Well, it sounds fascinating. It's called White Hot, and you can buy it anywhere, basically.
I mean, not anywhere.
If you look hard enough.
Anyway, that is everything for today's show.
Great stuff, by the way.
Cheers, Matt.
Brilliant.
Cheers, Joe. Cheers, Phil. This has been the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. We'll be back for our first Headingley Daily show tomorrow.
Hi, I'm Kumar Sangakkara, and I'm speaking to you from the Kia Oval. Hello to all parents of young cricket fans. If you are 11 to 16 years old, or if you are a parent of an 11 to 16-year-old, then this message is for you. As part of the partnership between Surrey County Cricket Club and Kia, this amazing opportunity has been created to motivate and excite you, cricket's next generation. This is your chance as a young cricketer to play here on the hallowed green of the Kia Oval, where I spent some great years playing for Surrey in the sport that I love so much. You could be here at a coaching session with me on Saturday, September the 23rd, before playing out there on the field, courtesy of Kia, who have sponsored this club and ground for over a decade. Cricket has been a huge part of my life since I was a little boy, from the age of about 11 or 12, and I know what an opportunity like this would have meant to me. If you want the chance to be part of this, all you need to do is apply, and we might see each other in September.